I'm Pomango, and I'm building a farming game from scratch in Unreal Engine 5, completely solo. And this channel is where I document all of it. If you're new here, the short version of it is it's an incremental farming game on an alien planet with a procedurally generated world. The terrain builds itself around you, and we're still really early in the process, but it's starting to come together. This week was a big systems week. I improved the interaction logic, scaled up the terrain, added grid snapping for crop placement, and spent an embarrassing amount of time removing grass. Let's get into it. Alright, the first thing that I worked on was the interaction system. So the old system was based off of a collision box above the terrain. So if you hit interact and you were inside that collision box, you would interact with the thing below you. The problem with that was that it was basically held together with tape. If I was in between two sections and I hit interact, it would either break completely, maybe work with one of them, maybe work with both of them. It wasn't consistent, and it definitely wasn't good enough. So when I went into the blueprint, I reworked the logic, cleaned up how the interaction event was being detected and passed through, and eventually got it to a point where pressing the interact button on a tile actually does what it's supposed to do. And then my first job with the interaction logic actually working was that I wanted to make the terrain tiles swap. So it would start as the terrain tile with all the grass and stuff, and then it would end up swapping to the crop blueprint, which is where you would end up being able to place crops on, and it'd be like a dirt kind of texture. Pretty easy to set up in the blueprint. You just had it so that whenever you detected you were somewhere, it looked at where you were, what you were interacting with. It would delete the thing that you were interacting with and replace it with the crop blueprint. Nice and simple. Once the swap was working, I hit an issue. The terrain tiles were very small, fine for testing, but it meant that the crop blueprint, the placeable object that represents the farm plot, was basically the same size as the tile, which looked wrong. I wanted big terrain tiles so that the world felt more open, but I wanted the crop blueprint to stay as its original size. So one tile might eventually hold multiple crops rather than being a one-to-one swap. That means going into the terrain blueprint and adjusting the scale. Simple in theory, but in practice I had to recheck collision boundaries and group alignment, but it ended up coming together and the world felt more like a world and less like a grid of stepping stones. Now I had bigger tiles and a working interaction system, but the logic was still interact with tile, swap tile, and that's not how I wanted it to work long term. What I actually want is, you look at a tile, choose a spot on it, and a crop blueprint gets placed at that specific location, which is way different than just swapping. Instead of swapping the tile out, I needed the game to figure out exactly where on the tile the player is pointing and spawn a crop blueprint right there. In Unreal, that means doing a line trace, basically shooting out an invisible ray from the player's camera, hitting the tile surface, and using that hit location as the spawn point. I needed the crops to not just appear wherever. That felt random. That's where the grid snapping comes in. Grid snapping is exactly what it sounds like. Instead of placing at the exact pixel perfect position, you round to the nearest grid point, so everything lines up neatly. I set a snap value, the size of one grid cell, and every placement rounds to fit. So the difference was the messy freeform placements versus the snap placements. Now let's talk about the grass. This is the one that took me the most time, and honestly the most interesting problem to walk through, because I tried lots of things before finding something that kind of worked. And to be honest, it still doesn't work exactly the way I want it to, but there's always next week, right? So the terrain tiles, where they spawn in, automatically get covered in grass. That's handled by the PCG system, which is the procedural content generation. Basically, the rules that say wherever a tile exists, fill it with grass assets automatically. And it looks great. But when a player prepares a tile for farming, you want the grass gone. A dirt patch with no grass, and removing things from a PCG system is not straightforward. Here's what I tried. I was trying to swap the tile from PCG generation after the fact, and that didn't work because the grass was already generated. My second attempt was clearing or refreshing the PCG component on that specific tile when it swaps. Closer, but triggering a PCG refresh mid-game has performance implications, and the timing was off. So the third attempt was hiding the grass meshes directly rather than removing them from the PCG. Technically works, visually unreliable, depending on how the PCG scatters things. And that's kind of what I'm stuck with, the third attempt. I'm hiding the grass meshes directly using an interaction box, and it doesn't work perfectly. Next week is to hopefully adjust this system and make it work a little bit more properly so that there's no gap between the crop and the grass also isn't overlapping with the crop. For now, you can clearly see that the plot is ready and it looks decent. Where do we go from here? Two big things on the near-term list. First, world generation memory. Right now, if you walk away from the area and the tiles are unloaded, when you come back, everything resets. Prepared plots, any changes are gone. That's obviously a problem for a farming game, so I need a way for the world to remember what's been changed. Second, the crop blueprint needs to actually be a crop blueprint. Right now it's a placeholder. The next step is making it functional. You interact with it, get a planning interface, select a crop, it all goes to the ground, it grows over time. That's the core farming loop, and it starts with actually being able to plant something. Those two things together are basically the foundation of the whole game. So next episode should be interesting. That's pretty much everything for this one. The interact logic is cleaner, the terrain is scaled properly, crop snaps to the grid, and the grass actually disappears for the most part. Any questions about how any of this works, or any ideas on how I should approach the memory system, drop them in the comments if you want to follow along with the build. I'll see you guys in the next one.